So Joe Magnarelli says that you're a breath of fresh air. Wow, that's a big compliment. And how does it feel to be a jazz artist in New York City?
How does it feel to be a jazz artist in New York City? A lot of the time, very overwhelming because you're playing along with some of the best musicians in town and you never know who's in the audience. So you can't always have to be on your toes, which is a good thing and a bad thing all in one.
Sure.
But
okay. And the reason I'm asking you that, because we have other jazz artists that come on, the reason is because you're playing to the style of jazz that's like Ella Fitzgerald, Billie Holiday, Nat King Cole. We noticed on the new album too.
I like the old-fashioned, straight-ahead stuff. That's always interested me since I was a kid, and I think for that in particular, New York is a great spot. I think if you're into more modern stuff, there's other cities that have that sort of a thing going on. But in terms of a straight-ahead scene, I think New York is very much the center of it still.
And you have a residency, I think, at Showman's. Is that correct? In Harlem?
Yes. All the clubs closed, so I no longer do. But I do like Showman's. It's one of the very last spots in New York that has an organ. So yeah, I play there from time to time.
Is it open now, or is it?
No, it's closed. Most of the clubs are not most. All the clubs are closed in New York right now. So.
And do you play also at Smalls and Mesero?
I do. I have a regular. I run the Tuesday nights at Mesero. Also, but Smalls is doing a live feeds currently. We'll see how long that goes.
Oh, cool.
Okay. All right.
And
well, we did listen to Blue Heaven. We loved it. And tell us a bit about it. Maybe some of our listeners aren't familiar with the album. How would you describe it, the sound, the feel?
Well, my first album, Blue Heaven, I recorded about 1.5 years ago. Mm-hmm. I thought it was high time. I think everyone is so nervous about putting out their first album and you want it to be perfect. And I realized, especially having like that I wasn't going to be with anything I made. So I decided just do it. I had a good band, put it together, and I think it came out pretty good. We recorded it in a small studio on a very cold winter day with hardly any heating in there. But it was great. And I think I kind of gathered the confidence because I met this drummer, Steve Williams, who used to play with Shirley Horn for years and years. And I don't know, he just made me kind of sing in a different way. And I thought, while I have this guy, I'm going to get it on record. So I was glad to have him on record.
Because when you're singing, you do have that groove, like, and the band does swing.
The swing, yeah.
Oh, thank you. That's all I'm really looking for, as long as it's got that swing. Thank you.
And I wanted to also ask you, who are some of your favorite fellow label mates, if you will, on Cellar Music? Are there any other artists you listen to?
Well, I was introduced to Cellar Live through Grant Stewart, and then we ended up getting engaged. But this was all before there was any romance involved, because I've always been a huge fan of his here in New York.
He's Canadian, right?
He is Canadian. He's one of y'all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's from Toronto.
Yeah, he's from Toronto. That's right. Where are you guys right now?
We're in Montreal.
We're in Montreal.
One day I'll make it out there as well.
We're gonna ask you about that.
We're gonna ask you about that later on.
Okay. So on that label, I would have to say Grant Stewart is one of my favorite tenor players in town, and he happens to be on the same label. So I like him. The label itself doesn't have very many singers, and I tend to be very picky with my singers. So I'll leave that open-ended.
Okay.
So we know you immigrated from Armenia and you were raised on American jazz records. So when you came to America, was jazz everything that you anticipated and expected?
That is a loaded question.
I know. We could take it bit by bit.
I did immigrate from Armenia I think in 2001 or two, and jazz just kind of happened to be the one thing that was similar there and here, while everything else was new and alien.
Yeah.
Because my father was a big fan, and we always used to listen at home. So, but in terms of whether jazz was all I expected here, the answer is probably no. I think when I was coming up, or when I was just beginning as a young teenager, I think kind of more modern or fusion stuff was a lot more popular back then. So I was hearing a lot of stuff that didn't sound like what I thought was jazz.
Okay.
And I think in the last 5 or 6 years, there's kind of been a wave back to the straight ahead stuff, which is what I really like. So I'm glad to see that. But there wasn't much of that happening when I was just starting out. So I was a little taken aback by it, but I think the wave is coming in my direction, so I'm glad.
Cool.
That's great.
And we saw that you performed for Nikol Pashinyan, the Prime Minister of Armenia. And that was, I think, for the Jazz Festival of Yerevan, if I'm not mistaken. And how was that, performing for the Prime Minister?
Oh man. So I've known you. I'm sure you guys know Vahag Haidapetyan.
Okay. I am not.
I'm not familiar.
He's kind of the main straight ahead piano player in Armenia.
Okay.
And he has been coming in and out of New York for the last 20, 25, 30 years. So he knows a lot of the guys here. He's one of the few Armenian guys that still lives there, but has a very strong connection with the straight ahead scene here. Right. And I knew him when I was a kid back in Armenia. So whenever I go back, we'll meet up and do something. So Grant and I to go do the festival with him. I didn't know Pashinyan was going to be in the audience. And when I found out, it was, I mean, I'm sure the way you guys feel about him, you know, for Armenians outside of Armenia, he is just, he's a big idol. And so I was very stupefied meeting him. But it was great to play in front of him. You know, it's great. It was a great homecoming in a way. So
excellent. We saw the picture and I go, what?
Yeah.
When I saw you.
Yeah. I mean, and he's just such a quiet, kind of very composed guy when you meet him up front, and all I could say was just Shnorak Alsun, you know? That's all that came out. So.
And how's the jazz festival in Armenia? Is it like something that they do every year, or?
They do. It's been happening since the mid-90s, I think. Yeah. And they have pretty big names there every year. And I'm glad, because Armenia, even since the Soviet era, has been kind of a hot spot in that region of the world for jazz. And I think that's continuing to be true today. So.
And I think in arts in general.
In arts in general, but particularly jazz, because something, I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I think something about the time feel, like Armenian folk music somehow lends itself well to being able to play jazz. I don't know why that is, but
yeah, like there's like Tigran Hamasyan.
Right. I think for such a small country, we have pretty huge
talent coming out.
Yeah.
Very good.
It's great to see.
You performed in Vancouver, right? You performed in Canada before.
I did. I had my first tour in Canada just last year, before the world ended.
If only.
I had a great time, man. Canada is it was such a different audience from the US, and I didn't expect it, because I've played in other countries. Considering that it's so close, I expected a similar reaction, but nothing like New York, and the audience is actually attentive and cares, you know. Okay. So it was a very different dynamic, and I really enjoyed playing there.
Well, where'd you play in Canada?
There's a place called the Shadbolt Arts Center.
Okay.
We did a concert there, and then Frankie's in Vancouver is kind of the main jazz club, so we did a couple nights there. So
you did West Coast, basically. You didn't.
Yes. No, I didn't come, and I was gonna do that in February, and then this never happened. But hopefully this coming year we'll put something together, and I'll be up there.
Well, the jazz festival, our famous jazz festival here, was canceled this year. So
yeah.
So have you ever thought about participating in the jazz festival here in Montreal?
Sure. Yes, of course.
I guess it would depend on the promoters and all.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
I guess it would depend on promotion, on promoters and stuff like that.
It would. It would. The label that I released my CD on is not huge. And I kind of like playing to smaller audiences, but I do enjoy the occasional festival. I did the Punta del Este Jazz Festival in Uruguay in January, and that was fun. But it's good to hang with big groups of jazz musicians. I can't too much because I came up. I think having come up in New York City as a jazz musician, I'm so accustomed to smaller venues and a much more intimate setting that I think I sort of prefer that overall. But on occasion, it's great to be outdoors in front of a big audience.
Well, the jazz festival in Montreal is not specifically all outdoors. There's a lot of shows that are indoors.
Yeah,
I see.
Yeah, and they're just part of the jazz festival. Like the artist is there.
It's organized by the jazz festival.
It's organized by, but you could be playing in a small club as well.
It's more of a theater usually.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. I'd say it's more of a theater.
Exactly.
Well, listen, I would love to do it. I would absolutely love to play one of your theaters. Sometime in
Miss it.
Oh, we wouldn't miss it. We'd be there. And we noticed that your family has a very artistic background as well. I think it's your sister, your mom, your dad's.
Yes.
Could you tell us about that?
Sure. I do come from a pretty artistic family. Whether that's a blessing or a curse, I'm not sure yet. I haven't decided. But it definitely was the main reason why we had to leave, because I think in the 90s there just was zero work for anyone involved in the arts. My father's a wood carver. My mother's an art therapist. My eldest sister is a painter. My second sister is also a musician. I'm a musician. My youngest one is smart and went into business. So I think she'll save us all one day. But yeah, most of my sisters live here in New York, and they do their own thing. And we used to have a group, me and my second elder sister, called YY Sisters, where it was an a cappella vocal group where we just performed Armenian music. And that was a beautiful experience, and I'm so glad I did it, but it's extremely difficult running a business with family. So it was, which I'm glad to see father and son, you guys are doing.
It's still early. But,
yeah.
But we did notice the YouTube video. We did watch it with your sister. I think it was called Heritage.
Yes, yes.
Actually, that was a very nice melody. Is that like did you guys write that?
My second sister, she usually did most of the composing and arranging for that group. So that's Tatev Yeghiazaryan's work. And it really was beautiful music, but we just kind of had a hard time maintaining the relation. So I'm afraid the group no longer exists. But
okay, the video's there.
It was good while it lasted.
Videos are there. There's proof.
What else? I want to talk a bit more about the album as well.
Yeah.
Did you pick those songs to do those standards? Are they all covers, or is there
an original in there? Or?
There are no originals in the album because I'm a strong believer in doing what you're good at. And I know there's kind of a cultural tendency today of multitasking and, being a yoga instructor and a DJ and a composer and a film director and I don't can be very good at anything if you're doing too many things. I think I'm a fairly good singer and I stick to singing, so I don't really write originals. So I stuck to kind of classic songs that I like that are not too oversung. But that were songs that I enjoyed singing at concerts, on gigs, and I kind of put it together like that.
Well, we noticed that a lot of the jazz singers, their first album, even if they are songwriters, their first album is always an album of standards. I guess it's like it's to show their singing skills as well.
Rite of passage almost.
I think there's definitely an element of that. I think you have to pay homage to the songs and the people that came
The
before you.
tradition,
So
I
I think
guess.
before you present your own thing,
For sure.
you kind of look back.
And
So
there's so much material. I mean, there's so much
there
material to
is.
do.
Choose from, yeah.
There is so much material, it's hard to choose, but like I said, I think it's important to kind of get that first album out of the way to get the nerves out, and then afterwards you can kind of be more meticulous about it.
And what's in store for you for the coming? I know we're in a pandemic. Times are like
Mhm.
sure, but
I don't know, a couple of years.
in a
maybe.
couple of years.
Oh God, I hope not. So I was planning on putting out a second record.
Okay.
I want to record it at the Van Gelder Studios, which recorded all the classic records from the 60s, the Blue Note stuff. So it has a great sound, and I want to utilize the studio while it's still operational. Aside from that, right before the pandemic started, I got a pretty hefty grant from New York's mayor's office for entertainment. It was a specifically women's fund that they started last year, and I got a pretty big grant for an album project with a friend of mine, Venetia Gould, which is centered around kind of the female experience through songs, and half the album is standards, which I perform, and the other half are originals of hers. So that's a good instance of the mix of two, and I gave it to her because I really love the songs that she writes, and I think she's a great songwriter. So she's doing what she's good at, and I'm doing what I'm good at. So it'll be a duo album.
Very cool. So the government does, like the city of New
They
York,
support you
they
guys.
support a lot the arts. Obviously.
Overall, I think in the States, the arts are underfunded, but having lived in New Jersey and New York, there's a very distinct difference between the two states. Even I noticed that there's a lot more for the arts in the city, and I've been able to do some projects through public funding, which is great. But I think New York is an exception. The U.S. doesn't really provide as much as it should for the arts. So New York City is an exception to the rule.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have family there. So.
We have family in Long Island as well. So,
yeah.
So
okay.
We drive down to New York, and obviously the border is closed right now, so we can't go on the road.
Yeah. Yeah. Is your family in the arts as well?
No.
Over there, no.
No, it's mostly my wife's family. They're in jewelry. They're pretty well known.
In the Diamond District.
In the jewelry design arts. In that sense.
Oh man, I had to get a ring resized. I should have known where your people were at.
Well, he's a very famous jeweler. I'll give them a plug. It's John Apple.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll keep that in mind for my next jewelry endeavor.
Yeah. John Apple. He's pretty famous, I guess, in jewelry.
Yeah, he goes to the conventions and stuff. So.
Okay.
And so, did you have any other questions?
Is there anything you wanted to maybe talk about? I know we discussed your projects a bit, but
anything you want to say?
Let me think. There's always. I also, since my group with my sisters ended, and I haven't been performing Armenian music, partnered up with a friend of mine in America who really loves Armenian music. And we've been working on songs that are not necessarily traditional, but it's pop music 90s with from Armenia, whether it's Ruben Hamakarian, Robert Amirkhanyan. So I've been working on that, and I also want to put out a record and was going to do a tour in California this summer, which also ended unfortunately because of the virus. So again, I'm hoping to get that going once it opens up, because I think Armenians kind of tend to shy away from their own thing. Although with that too, I do think popular Armenian folk is coming back in style. I'm seeing that in Armenia. So I'm really happy to see that, and I'd like to be a part of it as much as I can be.
Could you repeat the name of the person, because it got cut off a bit? Who were you working on that with?
Sure. I'm working on this new Armenian project with a guitarist named Eric Zolan, who's American but really loves Armenian music.
We saw the video.
You have a few videos playing with him, right?
I do have a couple uploaded with him. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we did
Yeah.
see that. You were singing. We saw you singing an Armenian song with the score. He had the score in front of him. That was the video, I believe.
Yes.
And so that's a new project.
That is a fairly new project, and I do want to get either an album recorded along with a small tour, probably on the West Coast, because there's more Armenians over there than here.
True.
So hopefully that's in the works as well. We'll see. I'm just kind of a sitting duck like everybody else right now, waiting for this to end.
We're all hoping this is going to end so we could go back to, enjoying what we enjoy,
Yes.
Well, thank you, Lucy. Thank you very much. We really appreciate you being here. We wish you all the best. And we will follow up with you, see what your next projects are in the near future as well.
All right. Շատ շնորհակալ եմ տղաներ.
Նմանապես.
Thank you so much.
All the best.
Of course. All the best to you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.